The fine wasn't just outrageous, it was insulting. I had been sipping my morning coffee, enjoying the sunrise from the porch of my ranch, when the mailman dropped off an official-looking envelope. I wasn't expecting any bills, but the thick paper and gold-stamped HOA logo on the front told me exactly what it was before I even opened it. My stomach tightened, but nothing could have prepared me for the number staring back at me. $250,000. Let me say that again, they claimed I owed them $250,000 in fines. For what? Oh, they had a list. Improper lawn maintenance, as if my open ranch land was supposed to look like the 18th hole at Augusta. Unauthorized structures, meaning my barn, which has stood here since the 1960s and was built by my grandfather with his own hands. Non-compliance with neighborhood aesthetic standards, which basically meant they didn't like the color of my fences or the fact that my land didn't have HOA-approved flowers lining the driveway. But the most outrageous part was the last page, a threat, in bold print: failure to comply will result in property seizure. I laughed out loud at first, thinking this had to be some kind of prank. But the more I read, the angrier I got. I had never signed up for any HOA. I didn't live in their neighborhood. My ranch sat just beyond what I always thought were their official borders. The nerve of them, sending me a bill like this and talking about seizing my property. I shook my head, tossed the letter onto the kitchen table, and told myself I'd deal with it after breakfast. That was my first mistake, because I barely got 2 bites in before I heard tires crunching on my gravel driveway. Out stepped a woman I had only seen from a distance before, but her reputation in town preceded her. Karen Dalton, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. She was dressed like she was about to give a press conference, every strand of hair perfectly in place, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a weapon. Her SUV, spotless and gleaming, looked like it had just rolled out of a showroom. She walked up to my porch like she owned the place and didn't bother with a "good morning." "You've been ignoring our notices," she said, her tone dripping with that fake politeness you hear from people who think they're above you. "You're in violation of HOA rules, and if you don't pay the fines immediately, we will be forced to take further action." She actually used the words, "forced to take further action," like she was some sheriff from an old western. I stayed seated, sipping my coffee, and asked as calmly as I could, "Do you have proof that my land is under your HOA?" She smirked, actually smirked, and said, "We've updated our bylaws. This entire area now falls under our jurisdiction." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she could just draw new lines on a map and suddenly my land belonged to her HOA. I stood up, stepped closer, and said, "That's funny, because I've lived here for years, and your HOA's so-called jurisdiction has never extended this far. You can't just update bylaws and claim property that isn't yours." But she wasn't listening. She was already scribbling something on her clipboard, saying, "You'll be receiving an additional penalty for non-compliance after this conversation." That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't about some lawn, or a barn, or flowers. This was a money grab. They saw me as an easy target, a property owner they could pull into their HOA's control to squeeze out cash whenever they wanted. And she had no idea who she was dealing with. I've dealt with pushy developers, shady investors, and overreaching bureaucrats, but an HOA trying to bully me into handing over $250,000? That was new. And I was about to make it their biggest mistake. I let her walk back to her SUV, still scribbling on her clipboard like she was writing me a ticket. She gave me one final smug smile before driving off, leaving a trail of dust behind her. I went back inside, poured myself another cup of coffee, and started thinking. If they wanted to play games, I'd play, but on my terms. What Karen didn't know was that I had something they didn't. I had history on my side. And I knew exactly where to start digging. The moment Karen's SUV disappeared down the road, I headed straight to my office. My coffee was still hot, but I had no intention of sitting down and sipping it. I've been in real estate and land development for over 2 decades, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that paperwork never lies. People can bend the truth, twist their words, and bluff their way through a conversation, but county records? Those are carved in stone. I powered up my computer and logged into the county property database, a place I'd navigated hundreds of times before. Parcel maps, deed histories, lease agreements, they were all there, waiting to be pulled up with a few clicks. I started by looking up my ranch property. As expected, it was clear, no HOA jurisdiction, never had been. But then I started wondering, if they were bold enough to claim my land as theirs, maybe there was something deeper going on. So I zoomed out on the parcel map to view the entire HOA neighborhood. I followed the property lines, noting the streets, the park, the lake. And then I saw something that made me sit back in my chair. The land beneath the neighborhood wasn't listed under the HOA. It wasn't even listed under the homeowners' names. It was listed under a corporate entity I recognized immediately, Lawson Land Holdings, LLC. My grandfather's company. The same company that, thanks to his careful planning, I now controlled. At first, I thought maybe I was misreading something. But I pulled the deeds, and there it was, in black and white. Decades ago, my grandfather had purchased the land, all of it, and later leased it to a developer for 99 years. That developer built the houses, sold them to families, and formed the HOA, but the land itself? The ground under every driveway, every front yard, every mailbox. That still belonged to my family. My heart started racing. I scrolled through the lease agreement, my eyes scanning for one specific detail. And when I found it, I nearly laughed out loud. The lease had expired, last year. Meaning, legally, the HOA didn't own the dirt their homes were sitting on. They were, in the eyes of the law, living on my land without any valid lease or rights. In other words, they were trespassing. I called my lawyer, Mike, a sharp guy with a dry sense of humor who loved nothing more than dismantling nonsense like this. Mike, I said, you're not going to believe this one. HOA sends me a $250,000 fine for violations. I checked the records, turns out I own their entire neighborhood. There was silence for a beat, then he let out a laugh that could have scared a burglar. You're serious? Dead serious. And the lease? Expired last year. Not renewed. He chuckled again. Oh, this is going to be fun. Within an hour, I was sitting in his office with a thick folder of documents, property deeds, lease agreements, maps, the works. Mike spread them out on the table like a poker player laying down a royal flush. They fined you for violations on your land, he said, shaking his head. We're going to turn this around so hard they won't know which way is up. We started drafting a formal notice to the HOA. It was short, direct, and devastating. 1. Their claim of jurisdiction over my land was invalid and unenforceable. 2. The HOA, its members, and anyone using the land were trespassing without a legal lease. 3. They had 30 days to either negotiate a new agreement with me or vacate the property entirely. Mike leaned back in his chair, grinning. We'll send this certified mail so they can't pretend they didn't get it. Oh, and let's give them a taste of what's coming. What do you mean? I asked. Access control, he said. That lake? Those roads? That park? All technically yours. You have every right to close them off until they cooperate. I could already picture the look on Karen's face when she realized the game had changed. She thought she could bully me with fake fines and empty threats. She had no idea she'd just declared war on the one person in this county who could pull the rug out from under her entire neighborhood, literally. That night, I walked the edge of the lake, watching the reflection of the moon shimmer on the water. This lake had been in my family for generations. My grandfather used to take me fishing here when I was a kid. Now, the HOA treated it like their private playground, banning non-members from using it, even though they didn't own it. I smiled to myself. That was about to change. By the time I went to bed, my plan was already taking shape. First, the letter. Then, the proof. Then, the meeting. If Karen wanted to talk about jurisdiction, I'd give her a masterclass in what real property rights looked like. And when it was all over, she'd wish she had never sent me that first envelope. 2 weeks later, the HOA held their monthly meeting in the community clubhouse, a building they like to call the heart of the neighborhood. From the outside, it looked like a fancy cabin with a lake view. Inside, it was more like a courtroom mixed with a gossip circle, long tables arranged in a square, folding chairs for the audience, and a big podium in the center where Karen always stood like a judge about to pass sentence. I walked in right on time, dressed in jeans, boots, and a jacket, nothing fancy. I didn't need to impress anyone. The folder in my hand was all the power I needed. As I stepped through the doorway, conversation slowed, then stopped completely. People knew why I was there. Word had spread that I'd been refusing to cooperate with the HOA. What they didn't know was that I wasn't here to cooperate, I was here to flip their world upside down. Karen spotted me immediately. She was wearing a crisp navy blazer, pearls, and that same smug expression she'd worn on my driveway. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "are you here to finally settle your fines?" Her words echoed in the quiet room. I walked straight to the podium, placed my folder down, and said calmly, "No. I'm here to settle something else, the matter of you trespassing on my land." A ripple of confusion passed through the audience. Karen blinked, then let out a little laugh, like I'd just told a joke she didn't get. "Excuse me?" I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. "This," I said, holding up the first page, "is the original deed to the land your neighborhood sits on. Purchased by my grandfather decades ago. This," I continued, flipping to the next page, "is the 99-year lease he signed with the original developer, allowing them to build your homes here. And this," I slapped down the final document, "is proof that your lease expired last year. Which means the HOA does not own this land. I do. Every road, every park, every blade of grass under your feet is mine." The room went dead silent. One of the board members leaned forward, scanning the papers. "That can't be right," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Karen's face tightened. "You can't just come in here and claim you own everything," she snapped. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low but steady. "I'm not claiming anything. I'm showing you legal proof, signed and recorded by the county. And unless you can produce something that overrides these documents, every single one of you is currently trespassing." Gasps came from the audience. A man in the back whispered, "If this is true, but Karen cut him off. "Even if that's the case, you can't just take our neighborhood away." I smiled, though there was nothing friendly about it. "I'm not taking it away. I'm offering you a new lease. But it comes with new terms." I slid another paper across the table toward her. She didn't pick it up, so I read it aloud for the entire room to hear. Term 1, my property is exempt from all HOA jurisdiction, permanently. Term 2, every homeowner pays an annual land use fee to Lawson Land Holdings. Term 3, all fines issued to me are null and void. Karen's jaw clenched. "And if we refuse?" "Then," I said, "as of next month, the roads you drive on will be closed to through traffic, the park will be locked, and access to the lake will be revoked. I'll post, private property, no trespassing signs at every entrance. I have every legal right to do so." A woman in the front row turned to Karen, her voice rising. "My kids play in that park. We can't get to school without those roads." A man near the window added, "If this guy's telling the truth, we're all screwed unless we sign." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could see Karen struggling, her mind racing. She'd come into this meeting expecting to humiliate me, maybe even parade me around as an example of what happens when someone defies her HOA. Instead, I'd flipped the script completely. She tried one last jab. "We'll fight you in court." I didn't blink. "You're welcome to try. But it's going to be an expensive fight. And while you're paying lawyers, your members will still be without access to the park, the roads, and the lake. I have no problem letting this drag out. I own the land, I can wait." The board members started whispering to each other, clearly panicking. Homeowners in the audience were already pulling out their phones, no doubt texting their spouses about what was happening. I could see the shift, the crowd was turning against Karen. Finally, one of the board members cleared his throat. "We should review the documents and discuss terms." Karen shot him a glare that could melt steel, but she knew she was cornered. She straightened her blazer, took a deep breath, and said, "We'll consider your proposal." I gathered my papers, slid them back into my folder, and stepped away from the podium. "You have 30 days, I said over my shoulder. "After that, we start locking gates." As I walked out, the low hum of voices filled the room, worried voices, angry voices, voices that knew the balance of power had shifted. I didn't even need to turn around to know that Karen's perfect little world was starting to crack. Over the next few days, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Calls from unknown numbers, emails from addresses I didn't recognize, even a few handwritten letters slipped under my front gate. Most were from worried homeowners, people who had nothing to do with the fines but were now terrified of losing access to their roads, their park, and their precious lake. The first week after the meeting, I made good on my promise to start tightening the screws. The entrance to the park? Locked with a brand new chain and a bright red, "Private Property, No Trespassing," sign. The walking trail that led around the lake? Closed off with a temporary fence and another sign. And the private road that cut through my land to reach half the neighborhood? I didn't close it completely, I just installed a security checkpoint and a guard who politely explained to anyone who came through that they were driving over private property and that a usage agreement was being negotiated. Word spread fast. By day 10, the HOA was in chaos. Parents were furious because their kids had nowhere to play. The local fishing club was demanding answers about why they couldn't access the lake. Delivery drivers were complaining about delays. And the homeowners? They were starting to realize something Karen had been desperately trying to hide: the HOA had no leverage here. None. I knew the pressure was working when I saw Karen's SUV creeping up my driveway one afternoon. This time she didn't come with her clipboard or her sunglasses. She looked tired, her hair a little less perfect, her usual confidence replaced by something else, desperation. She stepped out and took a slow breath before speaking. "Mr. Lawson," she began, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it, "I think we need to talk." I gestured toward my porch. "Take a seat." We sat down, and for a moment, she just stared at her hands. "I'll be honest," she said finally. "We didn't know about the lease expiration. We thought the developer transferred ownership decades ago." I kept my expression neutral. "You thought wrong." She nodded. "The neighborhood is panicking. People are upset. They want to keep their amenities. They want to keep their roads open." And, she hesitated, clearly hating the words she was about to say. "The board has decided to accept your terms." I reached for the folder I'd set on the table. Inside were 2 copies of the new lease agreement I'd drafted with my lawyer. I slid them across to her. "You know the terms. My land is forever exempt from HOA rules. You drop every single fine, past or future. And every homeowner pays an annual land use fee, non-negotiable." She flipped through the pages, her lips tightening at the fee amount. "This is significant," she muttered. I leaned back in my chair. "It's a lot less than what you tried to fine me for." And unlike your fine, this is legal. For a moment, I thought she might push back, but then she sighed and pulled a pen from her bag. She signed both copies without another word. I signed after her, the sound of our pens scratching across the paper sealing the deal. When it was done, she stood to leave, still avoiding eye contact. At the top of the steps, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said, "I was just trying to enforce the rules." I couldn't help but smirk. "Next time, maybe make sure the ground you're standing on actually belongs to you before you start writing rules for it." After she drove off, I sat there for a moment, enjoying the quiet. I thought about my grandfather, about how he'd always told me to keep my paperwork in order because land outlasts people. He was right. That land had been in my family for generations, and thanks to him, it had just gone from being a piece of property to a source of steady income for the rest of my life. The HOA mailed notices to every homeowner within the week, explaining the new agreement, though, predictably, they framed it as a necessary partnership rather than a surrender. I didn't care. I had what I wanted, total immunity from their rules and a fat annual check from every household in the neighborhood. The first round of payments arrived a month later, neat stacks of envelopes containing checks made out to Lawson Land Holdings. I deposited them with a smile, knowing the money had come from the same people who once backed Karen in trying to hit me with a $250,000 fine. Now, when I drive past the neighborhood, I can't help but notice how pristine everything looks, the perfectly trimmed hedges, the spotless sidewalks, the freshly painted fences. It's like they're trying to prove something, maybe even to me. But the truth is, I don't care what they do anymore. They can host as many HOA meetings as they want, argue about paint colors, or fine each other for having the wrong kind of mailbox. None of it affects me. Because at the end of the day, I own the dirt under their feet. And every single year, without fail, they have to pay me for the privilege of living there. Sometimes, victory doesn't come with a cheering crowd or a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it comes with a quiet moment on your porch, a cup of coffee in hand, and the knowledge that you've won, not just for today, but for every year to come. And that's the thing about land, you can build houses on it, pave roads across it, plant flowers and hang up flags. But if you don't own it, you're just a guest. And eventually, the real owner is going to come knocking.